And once we cross the street, it's like the sound of a pancakes. You just hear like each floor like slamming down on each other. And that's when the first building started coming down.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story, a series where New Yorkers talk about their city, what it means to be a New Yorker, and how September 11th changed that. I'm Jenny Pachuki.
Harold Buisson grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn. He describes living in his old, predominantly West Indian neighborhood as like being in the Caribbean with concrete. He graduated from Brooklyn Tech High School in the late 90s and left for a few years, and has recently returned to Brooklyn to live in the up-and-coming neighborhood of Kensington. And in the years that he was away, Brooklyn underwent a total transformation. Apartments in once industrial, mostly deserted neighborhoods are now featured in the New York Times weekend real estate section. Change has always been a constant in this city. Part of being a New Yorker is knowing that at any given moment, your regular dry cleaners could transform into a craft beer bar practically overnight. I'm watching all of this happen right now in my own neighborhood of Gowanus, and in a time when it seems like everyone is talking about the new Brooklyn, I'm always interested to hear the stories of New Yorkers who keep the memory of these places before they become the next new hot thing. And this is exactly how Harold and I started our conversation. Was there ever a point when you developed a realization that, or kind of a sense of pride or ownership about being a New Yorker or being from Brooklyn?
Oh, yeah. You're born with that when you're from Brooklyn. It's like kind of when you ask someone where they're from, if you're from Brooklyn, you usually never say New York. You say Brooklyn. So Brooklyn is kind of distinct, and we kind of hold our heads high. New York is cool. That's fine, but Brooklyn first.
What do you think of what's happening to Brooklyn? I live in Brooklyn. I live in Gowanus. And
okay.
I've been there for 6.5 years, and that neighborhood has changed so much in the time that I've been there. And I can't even imagine having grown up in Brooklyn and seen the complete transformation of the borough.
Well, especially Gowanus, because that was, that lake over there.
The Gowanus Canal?
Yeah.
That one? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're making it better. They're cleaning it. That used to be like the Toxic Avenger. But it's gotten a lot better, if you could believe that. So what's interesting about Brooklyn is there was a lot of neighborhoods when I was growing up. You kind of knew kind of how to move in that neighborhood, like meaning this neighborhood, avoid it, or this neighborhood, come with some friends, this neighborhood, don't worry about it, and things like that. So the difference I see now is particularly I see from the law enforcement side, they care a lot more about the neighborhoods. When I grew up, they were in certain neighborhoods and left other neighborhoods unpoliced. So now I see that change. And of course, property-wise, I see a lot more emphasis on taking care of property. Like particularly like in Williamsburg, when I grew up, nobody went to Williamsburg. That's like, you go there to die. And now Williamsburg is like the hangout place. So it's, there's good and bad. The good part is, of course, I like seeing things progress and get better. The bad part is, why they have to take this long?
I think the change in Brooklyn that transformation has obviously happened over time. But do you remember a time when it really started to pick up, when you were like, whoa, what is happening?
Oh, yeah. So on my old neighborhood, once I saw they started installing additional fire hydrants and more trees, that gave me the signal like, oh, they actually care if this building burns down now, and they're beautifying the area. So that's usually a telltale sign I look for. When I start seeing things like that, then I say, okay. Another thing, too, this is actually recent, maybe a couple years ago. There's a theater in Brooklyn called King's Theater. I've never seen it open my entire life. And all of a sudden I heard, oh, yeah, we're going to refurbish King Theater and open it. And I was like, wow. And now it's open. I see Shaka Khan's coming there. And I was like, wow, right on Flatbush. And that was never happening before.
After Harold graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School in downtown Brooklyn, he left for a while to play football for Stony Brook University in Long Island, and then he returned to the city right before the year 2000 to live in Manhattan. I asked Harold how the city felt before September 11th. Summer of 2001, before September 11th happened, what was your life like?
Great. That was, the year 2000 celebration, like when January 1st with the whole Y2K stuff. So it was like one fun fest from then on. Just everything was going on. I think I just got a new job. And at the time, I was actually living in Manhattan. I was involved in music at the time. So there was a lot of things going on music-wise. So it was just a lot of fun things that was going on.
What do you mean involved with music? What were you doing?
I had my own independent record label, and I actually used to do radio. I was a radio host in college, and I was still doing a radio show. Put out a couple of records with some artists, managing some DJs. So
Were there venues that you spent a lot of time at?
Yeah, a lot of venues. Used to go to this place called Nell's. I don't know what it's called these days, but that was a fun place. What else? The Palladium. That's like a dorm now, I think. A lot of places like to see different. What's it called? Tramps. That was a good one. That's gone. Same with the CBGBs. That wasn't really hip hop, but I was into hip hop. So CBGBs is like, different types of music, but I went there. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. That's gone. So there was a lot going on back then.
Where were you living in Manhattan?
I was in Chelsea.
What was that like in the 2000s, the early 2000s?
What was funny was the first day I moved to Chelsea. I used to always have a car in Brooklyn, so even moving to Manhattan, I was still going to keep my car. So the first day I moved to Chelsea, I got awoken to the difference of Manhattan and Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, if I leave my car on the street and it's past the time, I get a ticket. In Chelsea, you get a ticket and you get towed immediately. So I got my first day there. I think I woke up at 8:01 and I saw my car getting towed out my window. So that was a nice welcome to Manhattan moment. But outside of that, there was always something going on around Chelsea as well. Like there was a lot of the fashion folks in that area. And at the time, there was a lot of record stores within walking distance to where I used to live. So it was very convenient with what I was doing. New York was really the city that never slept at that time. There was a lot going on, always something to do. So there was never a lack of activity, let's put it that way.
But the city that would never sleep came to a halting stop on September 11th, 2001. Tell me about how the morning of September 11th, 2001 started for you.
Actually, it was a beautiful day. I remember I had a late morning meeting, so I slept in a little bit. At the time, I was in Manhattan, lived in Manhattan at the time, and I was, I think, the 1 and the 9 train. I was on the 1 train, headed down. So I actually used to get off in the World Trade to go to work.
Where was your office?
My office is on 140 West Street, right across the street from the World Trade. So I remember jumping on the train, headed to work, getting stuck on the train. And I remember I was panicking because I thought I was going to be late for a meeting that I actually was throwing. So then I remember they said it's a smoke condition. Everybody should get out. So I got off Chambers and started walking towards the World Trade. And then that's when I saw like everybody outside. To be honest, the first thing I thought when I saw everybody outside, I thought I was so late it was lunchtime. So I was like, oh, I'm in big trouble. So I'm kind of rushing to get to my meeting. And then I look up and I see 2 holes in the World Trade. And fire and then fire trucks is coming and stuff like that. So I didn't know what happened yet. I had no idea. So I was just thinking something hit it and then found a way to roll off and hit it again because it just saw 2 holes. And then I remember, I think it was on Vesey Street or something. I remember I started talking to a police officer. Then he kind of told me, a plane hit it. And so we just talking about it. And then next, he says, I think we should get off the street. Like we were like literally across the street. But right when we said that, like I'm looking up and it looks like sheets of paper that are falling. And then when you kind of really look, it was like people. Like I didn't know what they were. At that time, I didn't know people were jumping. I just saw some people, some paper just like floating down. I was like, oh. And that's when the police officer said, oh, I think we should get off the block. And once we cross the street, it's like the sound of a pancakes. You just hear like each floor like slamming down on each other. And that's when the first building started coming down. And then everybody starts running. But my first thought was, to be honest, was not to get tripped. I didn't want to get trampled over. So luckily I headed up, I think, West Broadway. And in retrospect, when I look back to all the films of stuff that happened that day, like when all the puffs of smoke and everything, that avoided me because I went up West Broadway. It didn't seem to come up that way. But people were running, screaming, pushing. It was crazy. I remember getting 14th and 6th, and it looked like a scene out of a movie. All you see is like cars just stopped in the street, and everybody's playing their radio. And then you're hearing, oh, the Pentagon attack, D.C., and it just looked like a scene out of a movie. People standing on the cars and looking down. I remember looking at the remaining building it had the big antenna. And right when I'm standing there, you hear a rumble, and then you see it going down like slow. And I was like, oh, wow. And it's just like got silent for like a minute. And then people start panicking again. And you could smell the smoke and burning all the way up there. So, yeah, that one was surreal. That was crazy.
Harold's experience after 9/11 was similar to many New Yorkers who were here that day. Many will say that although 9/11 was one of the city's worst days, that 9/12 was one of the best. A time when the city came together in the midst of unspeakable grief and destruction.
That was the nicest anybody in New York has ever been that day. Everybody was courteous and nice to everybody, which was weird. I remember going to McDonald's that day because I had nothing at home, so I went to McDonald's, and I remember I was like reaching for my pocket, and I didn't have any money on me. I was going to go to ATM, and then somebody says, oh, I got some money. That doesn't happen in New York. And paid for my meal. And like I said, at the time I lived in Manhattan, so every other day was like a bomb scare. So every time there's a bomb scare, everybody starts running, and then they say, okay, you can go back to your place and things like that. So there were people inviting us to their place to stay there and wait it out. Never happened before. So people were a lot more courteous.
Some people say that New York kind of became like a small town.
Yeah, definitely so. Like I said it before, like everybody's kind of usually on their guard out here. During that time, everybody was kind of like looking out for each other in a weird way. Like nobody felt like strangers. So everybody was very comfortable. Like people you would never see speaking to each other were speaking to each other, and it was that was actually the only nice thing about that experience.
As we talked about New York, Harold reminded me a lot of the other longtime New Yorkers who I've spoken to. There's this clear but subtle longing and nostalgia for the New York of the past. New York City has changed. Although it's tough to say how many of these changes are because of 9/11, the city that he describes after the attacks is one that's lost some of the energy that it's famous for.
What do you think are some of the biggest changes in New York since September 11th? How has the city changed?
It felt so different. New York felt a lot different than any other place I've been. And now New York is starting to seem familiar with every other place I've been. So I think it's lost a little bit of its energy. Like New York was very vibrant before September 11th in my eyes. I think it's a little dimmer now. Definitely a lot more carefree. Now you hear one siren, everybody's like, so it's definitely not as free-flowing as it was before.
And do you think those changes are because of September 11th?
It's a combination of things because, like, when I talk about the being more vibrant, there was a lot more artistic people that were in New York at that time, and because of the rising prices, a lot of artistic people got priced out, and those trendsetters are important, and they kind of kept the pulse of the city. So New York is still cool, but it was cooler.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story. I'm Jenny Pachuki, series host, writer, and producer, with executive producers Michael Frazier and Carl Creco. This episode was co-written by Elizabeth Bistro and myself. Stay tuned for our next and last episode in this season, when I sit down with Katie Couric to talk about her memories of September 11th and how she thinks that 9/11 is part of the lasting legacy of New York City. For more in the Our City, Our Story podcast series, visit our website at 911memorial.org.